Marshall, can you just talk the viewers through this map? Because this one is a slightly different fish.
It's a slightly different fish in that for the first game in this series, we don't have any water. What? It's a non-water map. What?
And it's non-orbital as well, my goodness.
And it's not orbital. This is district. There are 2 spawns that our players can choose. Looking directly on the north spawn, we've got a spawn here, these 4 mechs, and spawn on the right. That is the same player can choose either of those spawns. And then likewise on the south, the same player can choose either of those. So you can either end up playing directly between the spawns here, as I'm showing you, as we will not be playing.
Are you in the same game that I am?
Yeah, I was parallax. That's what you get. And the other way, as we see now with these players, is that we're going to have to play around this sort of this metal construction in the middle there, that sort of circular structure there. Now,
so here we are on game number 5 of the Beast versus Beast tournament, with Nick in blue facing Andreas in purple. Both players sat on 2 wins each. We are tied, and this is going to, you'll pardon the expression, given that we're not playing on water, turn the tide in one of their favours.
Indeed, and as you say, it inches that player closer to the $1,000 prize. Andreas here on the south, going bots, air, vehicles into metal storage. Will we see grenadiers playing over all of these metal buildings? We'll find out. Meanwhile, Nick going bots, air, vehicles into storage. So identical builds from these two.
Absolutely cookie cutter, both of them. In fact, even the layout is nearly identical. They've obviously optimized it so the commander has got the least walking to do. Oh my goodness. This is what happens when you play the same game over and over, folks. You all begin to think alike. Are these two actually clones of one another? Can we have a straw poll to determine that, please?
Andreas equals Nick. There's no contest. They both win 1,000 anyway. Blimey. Well, it'll be interesting to see whether these players use boombot tactics, whether they try and use spark drop sniping Faber tactics, or whether we'll use Icarus sniping tactics, any of which can be used to snipe Fabers. AndreasG has now found Nick's spawn. I don't think Nick has scouted Andreas' spawn yet. Oh yes, he has. Big time.
Yeah.
So both
And
players
both
know.
players escorting their scout planes with interceptors in a hope of an early air victory to try and thwart their opponent's scouting ability. Radar going up from Andreas, and I suspect shortly one will be followed up with one of those by Nick. Nick's actually expanding quite aggressively here, pushing out into a vehicle factory closer to his opponent's spawn and taking control of those 3 metal.
Yeah, really good move
Similar
there.
expansion from Andreas on the other side.
As it should be noted that these platforms that these players are on don't have equal exits, as it were. They go off to the side, only one side, or directly out the front. They don't go out to both sides. So Nick here in this direction of expansion is expanding towards Andreas's ramp exit, which will defend him on that front in the first instance, which is a very strong move. But we are playing on 360 degrees of a sphere. So Andreas could just go around somewhere else, you know.
So very important air trade there. Andreas out-microing Nick in the air and taking out the majority, if not the entirety, of his air force, allowing those bots to press ahead and poke at his expansions. Unfortunately, he's managed to find some empty metal spots over here. I think he was hoping that Nick would have expanded there already. And these docks are going to continue to try and harass Nick in and around his main base. There's an Icarus now, however, going to be hovering over those docks and probably going to try and pick those off if he can find them.
Yeah, now that docks cannot shoot air, as per a few patches ago, Icarus have free reign over these docks. Look at that. Beautiful. Have you ever seen that in a game before, folks? No. What is this?
So there's actually a fairly large map, and with these players being on polar opposite sides, they have a lot of battle space to try and play with. And in fact, because of the way that this works out, it's very often that 2 or 3 routes going completely different ways around the planet can work out roughly equidistant. So actually defending your main base, so to speak, against your opponent's aggression can actually be very difficult and time-consuming, and therefore I'd expect to see quite a lot of aggressive raiding from both players and over a number of different avenues to try and catch their opponent off guard. I also expect that's probably going to mean that vehicles are used a lot less in this game because the maneuverability and reaction time that you get with the faster moving bots is going to be of some value.
Could well be, but then again, T2 vehicles are also quite strong on this map with the shellers that shoot over all of these obstructions and from quite a distance. It'll have to remain to be seen as to whether we see T2 vehicles or T2 bots.
We've got a little exchange here, some fabricators, some of Andreas's expansion fabricators being taken out by this bot force. No AA in here. Andreas is able to take out Nick's docks before they're able to take out any of these metal extractors. Unless they're micro particularly well, they're all going to get picked off by this single bomber.
Taking off those fabbers, though, is a win in and of itself, which Nick should be happy with, in fairness, because his fabbers are still alive. He has 2 additional fabbers than Andreas's total in the top left there, we can see. Although Nick's economy is significantly smaller than that of Andreas's. Neither player, though, stalling, neither player floating. And that is because of their storage that they've got built. Nick going for T2 bots. Andreas also, excuse me, going for T2 bots. I
think this is very much going to be a micro heavy game. We're going to see armies fighting one another in such a way that we're seeing here these sort of frontal battles are not really going to be what we're going to see in this. We're going to see small forces picking away at one another, and the micro is going to be so important in that. Bless you.
Don't worry, I muted the stream for it, so their ears weren't destroyed.
Well,
like yours.
Marshall just sneezed, everybody, and I just blessed him for it. Let's continue.
See, Ron Cat's a nice person too.
So again, we're just seeing the expansion. This is very much reminiscent of the very first game of this tournament here. Andreas's expansion seems to be running away a lot faster than Nick's. Despite the loss of those fabricators, he just seems to be much more focused on pressing out and getting hold of as many metal extractors as possible. Nick focusing much more on the military expansion, putting buildings, that is fabrication bots and factories near his opponent's front line, and that's what he's trying to focus on. So as I mentioned earlier, the slowness of these vehicles counting against them, he's trying to build the factories closer to his opponent to minimize that disadvantage.
Yeah, he's just trying to be everywhere, isn't he, really? But Andreas is doing the same, but trying to be more sure with his footing, if that makes sense. Whereas Nick is just sort of throwing stuff to see what sticks. Like, you know, he's expanding with single fabbers over here, or, you know, he's just putting up a couple of turrets over here, rather than committing to expansions like Andreas is over here, where he's like, okay, this is mine right here, you know?
And we're about to see that starting to pay off. We've actually got 4 fabricators from Nick. This is his actual expansion here. We've got 1 point defense here and an anti-air turret. If those docks and ants were to push in just there, he would lose 4 of his 10 fabricators in a single. So 4 of his 15 fabricators, I should say, in a single stroke. This is what I said earlier, folks. Casters don't do maths on stream.
Yeah, we just look at pretty pictures that move, and we try and convey what those mean to an audience. Yeah. But look at this, we've
Sometimes
got
we use words.
2 fabbers building the same expansion from opposing teams. Oh my goodness. Looks like we really are.
This is where the attention to detail comes in, because at this point, Andreas has pulled his fabricators back, whereas Nick's fabricator is just blindly pressing on as if nothing's wrong at all, while the whole world is on fire around him. But as it happens, it's paid off because his quick reactions meant that a small force was able to come in there and push Andreas off, more by luck, I think, than by deliberate skill. There's fabricators being targeted now by a pelter. We're actually having a little pelter war over here, if you can see this, Marshall.
Yeah, and we've got some slammers coming into the mix as well, and that should, if they push in now, change this up a little bit. That being said, the defensive force coming in from Nick now is a significant amount of tanks. That will force those slammers back. They can't deal with that many. And the defensive pelters from Andreas now are going to have to turn to either that pelter all this army before Andreas can now come back down this ramp with his slammers, with his superior numbers, and push back into this little enclave here that Nick has tried to set up for himself. Meanwhile, it should be noted that I don't see much in the way of Blue Hawks. I see a lot of slammers, I see a few ghillies making their way onto the map, but I don't see any Blue Hawks, which I personally would use to fire over all of these buildings. But apparently, you know, I'm not an Uber player, so what do I know?
What indeed? I don't really. This is quite a difficult one to try and sum up because there's a lot happening on a lot of different fronts. It's very, very piecemeal. We do have a confrontation about to take place over here. Looks like Nick should come out on top for this one, but there are the
slammers there.
Of course, there. The slammers. No, you're right. The slammers will win the day. They've got the range and they've got the sheer brute force. And they're going to keep pushing through until they're met with a similarly sized force from Nick. Nick having to pull his forces back to the front lines, sacrificing those metal extractors until he feels confident to push back and thwart that push by Andreas. Is he going to lose 2 metal extractors to that push?
Nah, he won't do now, but he's got ghillies coming in for the support on the rear. I've highlighted them as I always tend to do with the more vulnerable T2 units. I try and highlight those in the army so that you can see their positioning. And now they come out, and that could mix things up in terms of these battles between these two on that particular front. Meanwhile, Nick using air fabs on the other side of the planet there to just get little bits of expansion and a T2 vehicle factory as well. Will we see levelers and shellers out of that? I suspect so. And what I'm also surprised by is the fact that we're not seeing a huge amount of air in this game. Then again, you know, with it very much being hinged, this map, on army positioning, isn't necessarily such a deciding factor unless one player decides to make it such, if that makes sense.
I'd quite like to see some horse flyers coming out to play. They are rather painful when they're allowed to operate in force. They can absolutely destroy an ill-prepared ground army.
Oh yes, most certainly, most certainly. But Andreas here, we can see on multiple fronts, defending still very, very prominently, and getting up some walls on the front lines there. Nick gonna have to tunnel vision this, I reckon, or rather might well do, because what I'm trying to say is that when you see walls in the not too distant, you're going to be like, uh-oh, something's being focused up over there. Maybe I should focus in dealing with it. So Nick's going to have to be careful, because Andreas might just be leading him up the garden path. We can see small raiding forces in other locations, going up over these ramps, making sure that Nick's expansions don't stay for long. Nick chasing them down with his T2, making sure the raiding parties get dealt with extreme prejudice. And it's just all very much about these small raiding forces rather than huge assault forces on this map. It's very, very tug of war.
Absolutely agree. What's going to decide this game is how effectively each player is able to destroy his opponent's expansion. And from the looks of things, Andreas's expansions are, for the most part, being left alone, whereas Nick's are just being constantly harassed. And I think Andreas had a few good wins at the start, which allowed him to push the front line forward and then push his safe zone outward. And unfortunately, Nick just hasn't been able to break through that. And meanwhile, that's allowed Andreas to go around with docks and with ants and just find the odd metal extract here and there, destroy it. And that's what's now leading to this 100 metal difference between the two players. Nick down at 166. Andreas now cruising up nearly to 300 metal income. I'm very surprised if Nick's able to bring this back. Yes, of course.
Can I draw attention to a glaring omission from Nick that I have only just noticed, really, because I was looking for it? Have a look at Nick's spawn, the North Pole. What do you see? Or what do you not see? He has not expanded to the other platform, which is the easiest expansion to do and probably one of the safest in the early game, and he didn't do it. He's not even attempted to previously, whereas Andreas has had both platforms for the majority of this game, and that gives him that leaping staging point in both hemispheres, as it were, if you split this map up into approaches from the side and direct approaches. And that, I reckon, is both what is contributing to Andreas's huge eco lead and also his versatility in dealing with Nick's assaults.
I would say that's probably more or less hit the nail on the head. What I'm interested in here is a teleporter been built by Andreas. Why? Where is he planning on connecting that to? It's very unusual. I mean, in fact, that's exactly what he's planning to do, is to connect these two platforms together so that they form a single coherent, defensible area. I think that might be what he's going for, but I can't be certain. This is an interesting development here from Andreas.
Yeah, the T2 air.
T2 air. Horseflies, I smell them.
You smell them before they have even appeared.
I do enjoy a good horsefly fight. It's very. Again, we're now seeing a little bit of a comeback from Nick here. He's about to take out at least 2 of Andreas's metal extractors, but is that really going to be enough? Probably not.
He has to
They're
keep
all
this up.
fairly well defended. He's got to keep going.
That's it, exactly. They're all really well defended. And even if he were to move all the way down here, the pelters, if I just select one of those pelters, we can see the range covers the majority of that approach. And he's going to have to be very, very careful, because not only is that going to be an issue, but he's getting, Andreas is now getting T2 factories up here, there, and everywhere. And Nick, I think, already realizes that's the game. And yeah, and you point out Andreas expanding to Nick's space there. What is by rights Nick's second expansion. Andreas is pinching, and Nick's like, yeah, I put a foot wrong here.
I think he's called that correctly. I think that was going to be a very slow death for Nick in the nicest way possible. You could just see the slow erosion of his eco versus Andreas. Andreas starting to build T2 factories here, there, and everywhere. I think it was only a matter of time, and Nick's called that correctly. GG's.
GG's indeed. Indeed, Reno. Now, let's go and have a chat and see what they think about that, because that was quite a wiping the floor, really.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh.
GG.
Andreas, I don't know. Nick, would you agree that you were just wiped the floor with?
Yeah, I think I got really bottlenecked econ-wise. Just generally poorly managing my expansions early game was not great. And getting my Faber train stopped is something that I rarely allow. And this time it just completely stopped my progress. I think if I had to narrow down, it'd probably be the poor air trades denying me vision. And then Andreas having that vision with his air, enabling him to just work around the map better.
I would say that's a pretty accurate summary, to be honest, from where I was sat. Marshall, do you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. But Andreas, your strategy just seemed to work there. Talk us through your main focus points.
Yeah, well, this map is sort of a no bullshit map. You just got to be everywhere all the time, and it's really intense, micro intense, awareness intense, and it's like the first step for both of us is figuring out: are we spawning opposite? Or are we spawning further from each other? And the moment that we realize we're further from each other, it's going to be all about how you apply that pressure and how you gain the information to where you want to push, because you don't want to push into a wall, right? And this game, I managed that better than Nick, and it panned out. I got successful raids, and he didn't get a single one in, it seemed. And that just brings you a victory all the time, right?
It certainly seemed like you were painting the map purple pretty much from the get-go there, Andreas. So, as far as we could see from the numbers, it was just a steady increase of the distance between the two of you. Nick, unfortunately, just weren't able to defend your expansions as effectively. Andreas just kept poking you. I think it was very much death by 1,000 cuts.
I think it just came down to that one push where I had a huge advantage in units, and he managed to get a pelter and a platform up before me. I actually wonder where those went. I'm going to have to rewind that later.
It comes down to every little part about the game, right? It's not one thing, it's slow and steady. There's no one thing I think you can point out in this game that really turned it. It's like more eco is going to lead to just better time overall. I think that's what you saw.
By the way, as I say, that was a very convincing win there by Andreas, which means, Nick, you are in the privileged position of getting to choose our next map.
What will it be?
I think we're going to go for evac.
We're trying the new evac. Blimey, all right.
It's new, shit.
Well, come on, you didn't
Oh,
have
this is- I think this is the first-
Don't act surprised.
I'm just thinking about my second orbital factory that I was going to build on that planet, and I'm thinking maybe it doesn't work this time. So maybe that's going to be your saving grace.
We'll see, we'll see.
It's like single air factory into orbital. That was like, it's a given one, right?
I have to say, Nick, I'm really sorry to tell you this, but your call was predicted in the chat.
Oh yeah, I think
Quitch has picked it up and it said, Nick to pick evac and pray for orbital snipe, says Quitch.
Yeah, that's the thing too. Like Nick is very much the kind of person who want to dial in a strategy on a specific map, and he does that over the course of many games. So when you see ranked maps, you're going to see him really know what to do because he's done it so many times. But the moment we get into a new territory and we got a new map in the pool too, which none of us have played, we've barely seen it. Marshall has showed it to us, but we haven't played it. And that might be uncomfortable to have to come up with something on the spot.
Which is why neither of you have elected to play for it, right?
What I'm excited for is when one of you ends up down on the ropes and you have to come up swinging with your own map that you've submitted. That is what I'm very much looking forward to.
Yeah, I wonder what Nick got in store for me. I guess we'll find out soon.
I tell you what, I'm absolutely loving the fighting talk tonight, chaps. Keep it up. Very well played, both of you, in that last game. And I guess we'll be seeing the next round very shortly.
Yeah, just before we dish out, though, while I'm here, I'm just going to point out that we're now sat on 3-2 to Andreas. If we get to 3-3, if Nick wins this, only one of your two submissions will be played. Because if we then end up with a 4-3, when we play the submission map, if you choose, it'll either go to 4-4, at which point we move on to current, or it'll be game over to a victor. Right?
True.
So, it's going to come down... If Andreas wins this map, we could play on both submissions. There is that possibility. But it's going to be an interesting dynamic going forward, and it's going to be an uphill struggle if the gap is widened. What do you say to that, Nick?
See, I'm looking forward to evac. I think Andreas is vastly underestimating what I have in store for him on this one. Since it
Looking
is
forward to it.
the only other orbital map aside from PAX, and I've done my homework.
On the map you haven't seen before. That's pretty good. Impressive indeed. I mean, even I haven't done that.
Right, well, we will leave you two to stew for a bit, to mull it over, as it were, before we evac out of here.
Sadly, it's muted.
Oh, he's already gone, is he? Oh.
It's already gone.